welcome you all to the third and concluding day of Chandigarh Literature Festival. We begin today's day with the session on the book Daughters of the Sun. Daughters of the Sun is an illuminating and gripping history of a little known aspect of the most significant dynasty the world has ever known. This book is the very first attempt to chronicle the women who played a vital role in building the Mughal Empire. Our critic for this book is Ms. Rumina Sethi. Ms. Rumina Sethi is a professor at the Punjab University. She holds a PhD from Trinity College, Cambridge, and was a British Academy Fellow at Oxford. She has held fellowships at the University of Cardiff, Wales, and at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. She has published in many international journals, and her book include Myths of the Nation and the Politics of Post-Colonialism. We would now like to introduce the author of this book, Ms. Ira Mukherjee. Ms. Ira Mukherjee is the author of Heroines, Powerful Indian Women of Myth and History and Daughters of the Sun, Empresses, Queens and Begums of the Mughal Empire. She has studied in Delhi and Cambridge. While living in Delhi, she developed an interest in the evolution of mythology and history and its relevance to the status of women in India. She is currently working on a third project, a biography of Akbar the Great. We would now request Ms. Rumina Sethi and Ms. Ira Mukherjee to please come on the stage for their discussion on the book Daughters of the Sun.
Good morning, everybody. It's a wet day today, but the sun is coming out. So I hope that the auditorium will be filled up pretty soon. Early morning sessions always have this problem. People are just walking in. So I hope they do so quickly. I am so happy today that I have with me Ira Mukherjee, who has written this marvelous book called Daughters of the Sun. I was very intrigued by the title. And then when I began reading it, I discovered I could not put it down. And then when, of course, Ira agreed to come for this conversation, I read the book all over again. And as I was just telling her, that my second reading was even more enjoyable than the first one, because I picked up these little details which I had probably glossed over the first time that I read it. I thought one of the phrases or the expressions that caught my eye in my first reading was, the great parchment that is India. And Ira describes the great parchment that is India as having seen the rules of a great many people. The Buddhists, the Jains, the Mughals, the Hindus, and of course the British. And somehow, because the British are the ones in the last in the long line of people who have ruled and conquered India, we tend to skip over a very significant 200 years, or a little more than that, of Mughal rule in India. And then when we do read histories of the Mughal rule in India, there is a good deal in those histories that is left out. I think Daughters of the Sun is an attempt to fill in the blanks. And who are these people who are left out? It is the women, the Mughal women, the princesses, the queens, the ladies, the nobility, women belonging to the nobility, the foster mothers, ladies in waiting, dancers, bawarchis, a long list of people who inhabit the harem. One of the very important aspects of this book I found out was the definition of the harem. And a lot of that has to do with, the way in which the harem has been represented, chiefly by European accounts. Ira Mukherjee is trying to tell us in this excellently researched book that the harem isn't this place of exotic sexual fantasy, which is the way we tend to think of it. We feel that here are thousands of Muslim women and others, the concubines and mistresses of great emperors and kings, all of whom exist for the gratification of the Padshah. It was quite an eye-opener to discover that the harem was not at all about the mistresses and concubines of the great emperors, whose names we have read over and over again. But we have forgotten about the women. The harem, in fact, includes women who were exceedingly powerful, very well educated, and therefore the book tries to demystify, a lot of misconceptions that exist. And those misconceptions are there particularly because of the kind of history that we have read in our school days. In fact, I was quite interested to see that Babur, who was the initiator of the Mughal dynasty in India, did not even like the name Mughal. He always insisted that he belonged to the Timurid lineage. And he did not like the word Mughal because Mughal was linked with the word Mongol. And Mongol was something that he detested. And I think Babur would turn in his grave today if he was to see that the way in which we know all of them is with the definition, the word Mughal. And so on and so forth as we read the book, which I think is a brilliant new genre. It should be called, I think, narrative history, as you were saying. It's a kind of a popular narrative history because it's the kind of history that we understand very well. Not history, the drudgery that used to be in schools and colleges and university as well. And so one reads the book and discovers that these were the great Mughal women who were eclipsed by these splendid Maharajas, that while there was a Babur and a Humayun and an Akbar and a Shah Jahan, a Jahangir, that they were their wives, they were their mothers, they were the elder sisters, they were foster mothers, many of whom became Padshah Begums, as they were known as. And the important thing to learn is that they were all extremely accomplished women. I didn't know, for example, that Noor Jahan enjoyed that kind of power. Noor Jahan, wife of Jahangir, had enormous power. She and many other women who were part of the harem would be able to guide the king standing behind these ornate jalis and then shout out to the king if they did not like any particular edict that he was passing, and the king would listen to them. Noor Jahan had even seals in her name. She could pass farmans if she liked. Jahanara Begum, the daughter of Shah Jahan, wrote Sufi treatises, 2 of them. In fact, even Gulbadan, who was the daughter of Babur, and she is one of the earlier Mughal women, was educated in history, mathematics, physics, astronomy. Many of them wrote poetry. And this comes as a stark contrast to Rajput women in those days, because Rajput women were not educated. Rajput kings perhaps did not want their daughters to be educated, but the Mughal kings. It is such an eye-opener that the Mughal kings took a great deal of pride in educating their women. And yet, it is extremely sad that we think of the Mughals or the Mughal era as an era of lethal patriarchy. We think that everything that went wrong with India is thanks to the Mughals. We think that Parda was perhaps introduced in India because of the Mughals. It is quite surprising that Parda was something which was very perfunctory, even in the times of Humayun. And the women went on long Hajj. Gulbadan and Salima went on a long Hajj for 7 long years, even if they were chaperoned. So what I discovered in Ira's book, which of course led me to an earlier book of hers also, and that is called Heroines, where Ira Mukhote examines a lot of women that we have read and heard and mythologized, like Draupadi, for example, Radha, Lakshmi Bai. I realized that as far as the history was concerned, there were not enough women in history. And one word that could describe the absence of women in history is the word neglect. Women are neglected in Indian history. Not just in Mughal history, all women are neglected in Indian history. And I thought it was quite important that women should be restored to history as much as history should be restored to women. Rani Lakshmi Bai, for example, about whom you write a chapter in Heroines, has often been compared to the Joan of Arc. But whereas Joan of Arc has inspired thousands of books, Rani Lakshmi Bai has very few books or plays or works dedicated to her. Other than that, another thing that came to my mind was the manner in which women have been appropriated. Women's accounts have been distorted. Women have not been allowed to speak because there have always been men speaking for them, exactly in the manner in which these Mughal women have been eclipsed by more powerful, more splendid, more bejeweled, and better known male Mughal emperors. And Ira says, and I endorse that heartily, that whenever there has been some mention of women in history, the image has been sanitized, the representation has been filtered and distilled. And in fact, women who were extremely articulate and vocal have more or less been presented as, household drudges or devoted wives in an effort to sanitize and make them more appealing to male sensibility, in a way in which their energy could then be channeled into a direction that was suited to everybody who was there to read it. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a brief kind of introduction to what we are about to hear and get involved in. And I would like to welcome Ira Mukhoti once again. Thank you. And I'm reminded of the organizers saying that please don't make it academic, because we have a lot of school children in the audience. So I'm going to keep it quite simple and begin in a very general manner by asking Ira to describe briefly what was the constitution of the harem that is referred to as the haraman during the Mughal days.
Thank you so much, Ramina. Thank you for inviting me, for choosing my book, and for speaking so eloquently this morning about it. I feel I have very little to add to what you have said. But since we have a conversation, the harem is one of the most important concepts behind this book. And it is, of course, a thing of great mystery, mystification, mythology, and so much myth-making around the idea of the harem. This comes to us really from the English, or shall we say the Europeans, because we can't blame everything on the British. There were the French adventurers, there were the Italians, all these Europeans coming through India at that time and writing about the harem. And they wrote about it for a public back home who was becoming more and more interested about this exotic East. And the harem to them was something which was denied in many ways. They didn't speak the language, so they had to use translators to even understand. So many of the nuances were lost to them. They were physically sequestered from the harem. Nobody was allowed access. So they were physically unable to access this space, which thereby became a thing of great mystery. And fervid imagination added to that, and bazaar gossip. And the thought that there were many women sequestered inside this space and there was only one man, the Padshah, available to all these women, led to all kinds of imaginings, as you can well conjure up in your minds. And so a lot of the myth around the harem became the idea that this was a space exclusively for one male, the Mughal Padshah, and a lot of women, a lot of indolent women, sensuous women who were only spending their time beautifying themselves, basically, or in frustration and in languor and looking for ways to attract his attention and fighting with the other inmates of what basically seemed like a prison. But actually what I found when I started doing my research was that the harem, or the haraman as the earlier Mughals called it, Babur and Humayun, was really just a place of refuge and safety. So when Babur first came to India and he won the Battle of Panipat, one of the first things he did was to send letters back home to the Central Asian lands from which he came and said, all of you Timurids, all of you who are now homeless, who don't have a homeland, come to India and I will grant you a place of safety. And many women answered this call, and Gulbadan Begum gives a list of all these women. And these were distant relatives, they were aunts, they were widowed aunts, there were sisters, there were cousins. There were a whole lot of different types of women who came to Babur and became part of his haraman. So this became a place of safety and refuge for these refugee women.